so I'm doing an introduction to the Oculus Rift. I don't know how much any of you guys know about it, but yeah, there's quite interesting. I've always been interested in virtual reality, augmented reality for 5 or 6 years now. But I sort of gave up on augmented reality, seeing the sort of examples you get on the mobile phones where you sort of look through it and they look through the camera. Interesting as a gimmick, not overly practical, I've found. Like, because of the low processing speeds, you get very low refresh and frame rates, and the sensors aren't quite accurate or quite up there. But as for virtual reality, it looks like we might be on the verge of a bit of mainstream revolution, perhaps. So what it is a low latency, motion tracking, head-mounted display. That's all it does. It doesn't do any processing on its own. No built-in anything like that, just a display. And so it's not a virtual reality solution on its own. You're going to have other sort of devices to use for inputs, alternate inputs. Of course, you get no sensory impact back or reference like that. But this is just one of the components that we're going to need for it. So the specifications in it. So we have a 110-degree diagonal field of view, which is a lot larger than what the current sort of ones that offer, which is really in practicality is 90 degrees, which is sort of, if you imagine sort of like a set of ski goggles on your head. It doesn't really impact your sort of peripheral, like you lose a little peripheral vision, but that's about it. So you sort of do get a sort of feeling of actually being in another world, which is quite good. So the screen is actually like a mobile phone type screen, 1280 by 800 display. So it's 5-inch. So this is all sort of helps sort of mobile phone driven revolution. It sort of helps this industry quite a lot in bringing down the prices and the specs, upping the specs of these small screens and refresh rates and stuff like that. Connections, it's going to have a DVI, HDMI, unprotected connection for your video in, and USB for all your sort of sensory things, so it's going to have for your rotation and stuff like that, so it's going to go to USB. It's light, currently 220 grams on the prototype that they've been mucking around with, but I'm going to change in the final. And they've also sort of said that apart from PC, it's going to support mobile as well. So we have like Android devices which have HDMI out. They're going to have a SDK to support that straight off the bat. So it'll be interesting to see if everyone actually uses it like that.
I take it doesn't support sound. It looks like it should include
no sound. As I'm saying, it's just a display device and a bit of sensory for rotation as well. I'll show you in a minute. So no sound, you have to bring in your own headphones. Everything's really been for, as I'll show a bit later, for latency reasons, been offloaded all to the actual program running on your main computer. So yeah, there's actually nothing really revolutionary about the device and its components itself, but put together, it's like most things, it's just a matter of timing, and it's a matter of like the costs have come down, they've got a good screen, they can get a good field of view, low latency, easy integration, we think, because they haven't shown us how easy it's going to integrate, and we're going to have some sort of distortions, which I'll show you in a second. But the biggest thing that sort of keeps it to theirs is the tracking software. To do this and track and keep it without locking, without sort of sliding effect, the accuracy from the accelerometers. So the problems with the accelerometers of the past are not accurate enough, but if you could do a slow movement, they wouldn't pick it up. So you get a sort of like a sliding effect. So if you do a sort of slow move to this way, eventually what will happen is the world will tilt. And so you'll be standing vertically, but the goggle inside the goggles, the world will be at an angle, or be slightly skewed in rotation, or something like that. So they haven't been quite accurate enough, and that's where they've come along, and that's what they're really protecting. So they're not going to release any sort of information on how the algorithms they're using to keep it all locked in position. Yeah, so all image distortion is not done on the device itself, it's all done in your engine. So that's what the SDK is going to primarily do, and it's into is to tell us how to do the right distortion in the, as I'll show you in a second, lenses to correspond with these lenses. There's not that revolutionary, and people have already started making duplicates. These online people are showing you how to make them in your backyard, backyard garage or whatever. So these are pretty much exactly the same, but the only difference is they don't have the head tracking. But people are making quite decent duplicates. This is sort of showing just like what's actually inside the device is showing. It's not actually that much. It really is, you've got your screen, and there's a bit of a frame holding the lenses in the correct position away from the screen. That's it, in the headset. And then of course you've got your connection straight to your PCB board, which controls the video signal and the processing of the rotation of the accelerometers. As I was saying, the resolution of the screen is probably their biggest shortcoming, because at the moment it is 1280 by 800. But of course, because it's going to have your two eyes, they actually have to halve that. So effectively you end up with a 640 by 800 display, which is obviously quite low res, and they plan on upping it, but still the screens aren't really quite there. They've got the high resolution mobile screens, but the refresh rates aren't quite there yet. So they plan on having one in the commercial version, but it's not there yet. But to get around that, what they've actually done is with the lenses, they've actually had a variable DPI. So instead of having your standard DPI on the screen, it's like they actually have bunched the pixels up. Be much more rounded in the full version. So you have a high DPI in your center, and then round to peripheral vision, the DPI drops off.
But then you have to render the graphics differently.
Yep. Yeah. So they're sort of suggesting that you're going to have two ways of methods of integration. One way that's going to apply like a shader straight over the top of what you finally do. It's for people who've already got the game sort of out, and a more deep integrated sort of method of rendering it to the correct for the actual device.
Does it render out sort of stereoscopic 3D?
Yeah.
Do you know that?
So 3D. So yeah, people. One of the things that ask me often is it actually flickering from image to image and like using active shutters or something like that? But it's not. They've actually just, as I said, they split the screen in half. So half the screen is one eye, half the screen for the other eye. So you are going to have to render from two different perspectives slightly, depending on how far the person's eyes are apart or whatever.
Is there a divider in between, or like this side could look across this way and see the left side?
No, due to the just the way that the lenses like actually distort it, so you can't actually see further across. Yeah. So these are the current limitations of the current design. Is first of all, it's only tracking your X, Y, and Z head rotation. No lateral movement is detected at all. So, this is, as I was saying, this can lead to this point here. It can make you slightly sick. And when I say slightly sick, there are reports of people sitting on chairs and their head is between their knees for half an hour using the device. So, yeah. So they've said they expected 1 in 20 or something like that, but real figures have been coming back and they're saying 4 out of 10 people have attacking, having this sort of problem. But it sort of comes back to a sort of advanced form of motion sickness, where what you're seeing is different from what your brain is expecting to see. So because you don't have those lateral movement detection, you're sitting there looking through the goggles. So if you move this way in the game, nothing happens. So your brain really seems to freak out quite a bit until you get used to it. So we'll see how that goes. But they intend on adding lateral movement later on, just to get the costs down for at least for the development kit. It's not going to have that. Of course, it does support glasses, which has been an issue for me. That's due to because of the way the lenses are designed. Because they're actually quite small, you have to have them very close to your eyes, otherwise you sort of look like looking through a window. So due to that, they just can't really fit the glasses in between that. So they're looking at solutions for it and being ones where you sort of do insets after the lenses and stuff like that. Or
will you be able to get prescription Oculus with?
Maybe, yeah. But it's not quite the same as the standard glasses then, so I'm not sure. But they're
I assume
definitely
contact lenses would be fine.
yeah. Because for some people it's actually not an issue. It's if you're long-sighted, it's not an issue because it's actually the same as effectively looking at something from a distance. Because the light comes in at a parallel.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you're like me, nearsighted, then you're going to have glasses because I can't see well in distance. So yeah. Oh yes, and of course it impedes current input methods. This is just that you can't see anything in the real world while you're using the Oculus Rift. So the current method is getting around of giving people control pads, something they're very familiar with to use as an input method. Because a mouse and keyboard, the mouse is you get away with, I guess, but the keyboard, if you change the key, like move your hand around, it's just
You lose the positioning.
Yeah, so you sort of go, oh no.
You need a very highly accurate virtual keyboard in your world.
Yeah, exactly. Why not? So that's the case. So as I was saying, not much info has been given about this apart from they sort of stick to their standard line. People are expecting sort of this, at least a C++ implementation to give as a guide to go by. And as I was saying, later on there'll be default implementation of this in most of the big engines as well. Because they've already now support. I'm sure next slide. Let's finish with that. So, if you ever saw the Kickstarter video, they actually got some pretty big name support back behind them. These engines have already confirmed support. I'm pretty sure they said launch day. By the time the dev kit's out, they're going to have at least a first attempt at fully supporting it. So, and of course, IDE, Doom 3 BFG comes with it, which I'm pretty sure is Doom 3 on their current tech engine, I think, sort of scale up or something. Doom 4, of course, Hawken Star Citizen, which is actually on the Cry engine, interestingly enough, which haven't announced official support. And of course, many indie projects. Yeah. So, this is mainly, as I was saying, talking about the dev kit, what they're sort of been hinting at, what they want in the final commercial version, of course, is a high resolution display. This is the top of their wish list at the moment. Detects more head movements, of course, so your lateral movement at least. It's actually funny what they did for Doom 3 was because there's no lateral movement. So they've tried to sort of dummy it in a little bit. So, because of course when you pivot your head, you don't just sit there and literally just pivot it without moving your body at all.
Yeah.
So what they do is when they detect the pivot, they actually lean you forward slightly as well. So they're trying to sort of dummy that sort of, and if you look up, it sort of rock you back a bit as well. Try and dummy it up a bit. And they've had to sort of ditch certain effects in the game as well. So if there's a big explosion went off with you, you just get knocked back. They can't do that anymore because of course they can't knock you back in real life. So there's another disconnect. So everything sort of has to stay sort of locked together. And they're sort of hinted at wireless because as you can tell, if you've got a wire going into the back of it, you turn around too many times.
You just need a backpack.
Yeah,
That goes into.
yeah, exactly. You can see the demos of the given with people, and there's always like some tech standing right near them, holding the wire above their head.
Yeah.
To make sure, because people get some pretty carried away when their first imp, whatever, throws a fireball at them. You've seen people like literally just try and jump out of the way. So, yeah. But the future version of Rift 2.0, the commercial one, they said they want it to release in late 2013, but it's probably going to be a year, I guess. This is more approaching the issues with the standard mouse and keyboard inputs. Since the hype of the Rift sort of blew up on Kickstarter, we've seen a lot of these new type input devices like come out of the woodwork. Some of them like old ones being rehashed, old ideas like real-time motion capture. I'll show you a demo of most of these ones in video form. A few unusual ones like the Wizard Dish, which I'll show you. But these two in the middle, the Leap Motion and Razor Hydra, are very interesting, and I'll show you a bit about them. Thanks. So this is the Whiz Dish.
Curious.
Pressing video as much as I can. It's not really important to hearing. But there's been many attempts to try and solve the problem of walking in a virtual world.
Just explain it.
Yes. Good say that. So of course you need to, people's first instinct is to actually make you walk. But to detect that is quite tricky. So this is this fellow's solution, which is me making the rounds.
So dangerous. So unnatural. Oh, it's just like low tech, it's just slippery.
Yeah, okay. There's a special tube and there's a sensor underneath that detects the movement.
Oh.
And so you get the effect of, you know, moving sort of ish.
I heard one the other day, I think the military was using it, where it's a treadmill that just tracks in any direction.
Yeah, I've seen that, the eight-directional treadmill or something. So it's quite clever, but a lot of these things come down to practicality.
Yeah.
Like, people say, oh, it's all going to be about motion tracking. But, you know, I've worked in the visual effects industry a bit, and even like the ones with the huge rigs that have like 16 cameras all lined up, you get the data back, and you still got to clean it up quite a lot. So, and that's a 16 cameras, and you can't see people like, you know, setting these rigs up in their living rooms and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
I think this is clever.
yeah, it's interesting. But,
I feel like that's all over them, but it is quite, it's small.
yeah, in many ways it's practical, but you need a bit of insurance on this one.
Yeah.
Which is garden.
Yeah, I think it's indicating.
Or maybe you rig someone up and add things to the ceiling so you can't fall down. You can
The
still.
thing is, you can't see the ground and you're on a slippery surface. It's not.
They're very tiring moving around in that case after a while.
Yeah, well, it's
Games.
actually like a lubricated surface or something. So,
Once it gets in the vehicle and doesn't feel.
yeah. There you go. So next one is, this is one I'm most interested in. I actually bought one of these and hopefully it'll turn up in the next few days. This is the Razer Hydra, which is oddly enough started as an attempt of a sort of combining Wiimote sort of technology, more accuracy, to replace the mouse and keyboard. So how they had it set up was your right one would be your mouse, and your left one would be sort of like your straight and that sort of stuff. But how the right one was really to emulate the mouse, and that if you want to do a big 180-degree turn, what you have to do is you move it as far as you can, click a button to disengage its movement, go back, let go, and move again. So it's sort of like a ratcheting sort of thing, sort of, you know, brakes.
That's like a mouse.
Yeah, exactly like a mouse. But so early enough, so it wasn't very popular in that format. But early enough, due to the way the technology works, it's actually turned out to be very good for mapping one-to-one arm movement. And that it's actually using sort of like a magnetic field, which is good up to 4 feet in any direction around this sort of sphere, which you sort of place on your desk or whatever.
Oh, so those two come off.
Yep, they come off. So they're fully, you put have one in each hand, and you can move around. So it's quite good. You can map like the analog sticks as your macro type movement. So you like your large rotations and your like moving left, forward, back, straight from left and right, that sort of stuff. And then your moving them is actually moving your hands in real life. So you have you just run. But yeah, I've got a demo of a fellow who's got this beforehand. It's he's done quite a good job.
And they're wireless.
I don't believe so. I think they're wired to each other, but not the base, I believe. I'll have to get back to you on that when I get mine. But yeah, this is what I'm probably going to work on next, is muck around with trying to get these to actually accurately map in your hand movements in a virtual world from a first-person perspective. Because you really only get its current position and your hand rotations. But with that, you can sort of get a good sort of simulation of like where hands are and your rotation of the elbows and the rotation around your shoulder and stuff like that. But yeah, there's some fellows already sort of made it start. I'll show you that. So, and this is the sort of And this is one of the things that
The goal is to
minority report.
fundamentally transform how people interact with computers and to do so in the same way that the mouse did. Here you're seeing my fingertip. This is sort of the direction of my finger. Here's sort of the path it's tracing out. And of course, everything's in full 3D. So you can see, we're tracking that too. We're not just tracking the fingertips, we're also tracking the entire hand. So here's my entire hand.
Yes, the
You can see
fidelity
very
is sort
small,
of like
but
a
the fingertips are very easy to pick up.
much higher version of
Of course, you
the
can put one hand
Kinect,
into other objects.
but a much more confined space.
Or, here's
So then works as sort of like a
subtle
30
motions
centimeter curtain in front of your
are
screen.
really occurring on the screen. And so that there's no distance between sort of thought and response. This is social networking data, so you see lots of little connections between the people, the little triangles, and sort of what's going on here. And data lists like this would be very complicated to visualize and very difficult to interact with. And here we're interacting with sort of a physical thing. Apps, just a lot more interesting. Yeah, way more accuracy than probably necessary for pitch to zoom, but you get a really good responsive sort of touch-like feeling. I can zoom in and I can go up and down, I can left and right, but also I can also do, of course, all these things simultaneously. In San Francisco, I'm Daniel Turvin for CNET News.
It's quite an interesting device. I've seen a lot of people were talking about trying to implement that with the Oculus Rift, but as I was saying, it's quite a small field with actual range.
Don't punch your computer.
Yeah. So there's been proposals to actually try and mount it upside down on the Rift, so it faces like downwards, always in front of you. Yeah. So interesting ideas. But
What was the sensor? What type of sensor was that?
well, they're very hush hush about it, but we think what everyone's saying is thinks it's sound actually.
Sound.
Yeah. That's what's being thrown out there, but they're very hush hush about it at the moment.
I was
So,
wondering if it might have been lighter.
yeah, that's what I thought too initially, sort of like something like that. But I've actually got one of them in order myself. They're only $80.
Yeah, it would be lighter then.
No, they're tiny. They're about yay big, and then so you sit behind the back of your keyboard or whatever. But
I'm sure it's not just a mini version of Connect. Could be a mini version of Connect.
it could be, but the fidelity, like the resolution is massive. Like, do you see like when he stuck his hand in it?
Yeah.
It's full accuracy. Apparently, he can get that down to 0.01 millimeters or something. So, and there's demonstrations of him with holding a pencil, because he can tell between a hand and a pencil, and he's writing within 1 centimeter square his name.
Right. Wow.
So, yeah,
Because when we saw his hand and we saw his pencil, were they 3D models mapping or were they actually some sort of scanned result? And that was actually the visualization of the sensor data. Yeah, that's
Because
very
there's ones where he actually puts in a chopstick, and it doesn't know it's a chopstick, but it's got
It is.
And he plays Angry Birds with it.
Yeah.
I've seen that one.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And $80.
Yep.
It's incredible.
Yeah. So a lot of people are really keen on trying to stick that with the Oculus Rift, see what they can do with it. I think even the developer said you can even set up an array of them, so like a couple sort of around and sort of.
Have they mentioned distances? Because it might hit the technology, how far away from the sensor it can detect something.
Yeah, not very far. Yeah, that's one of the limitations. Is like they stick it behind the keyboard, and too much in your hand. They said it's only like 30 centimeters deep or so, to the top of your screen, sort of thing. So,
The way I imagined it was it's a touch screen, but you don't actually have to touch the
Yeah.
screen.
it's quite interesting. And of course, as I was saying before, people are really trying to do the real-time motion capture again. So, but as you notice with this, he's obviously dedicated a lot of processing power to it, but it's still very jittery. It could be good for using in a sort of like a macro sense, and then you have something else more higher resolution, higher fidelity for what you need, like a hand and stuff like that, and you combine the two sets of data. But on its own,
Presumably those bands all over with the sensors it's tracking.
yeah.
Are they independent, like what do you call them? IMUs and commercial sensors, or
No, it's
No,
cameras they catch, right? Little lights on it. and that noise can be filtered out, but it's showing that there's inaccuracy to start with.
Yeah. It's very true. And that's generally what you get back from this sort of motion capture. What you have to do is smooth it out quite a lot. And it's actually using the Sony head-mounted display, which has been floating around for a while now. Okay, you guys have seen that, but it's a different approach. They sort of try to do as if you were in a cinema. You're looking at a very large screen, like a little bit of distance away. It's not sort of like the Oculus approach, trying to wrap it around your. Yeah. This was going to share it. Initially, Freddie was talking about that the fellow has actually used the Hydra, Brisbane Hydra, to map the hand movements in. It's just a set of data. It's actually used, as it says, some robot, the same sensor algorithms they use for robotics to simulate like forces and that sort of stuff. Because of course you don't have any feedback yourself. So if you collide with something in the game, your hand continues moving, but the in-game virtual version itself doesn't. So when you move back to a location where it can, it sort of clicks back.
Pops back,
Pops back, yeah. So, I'm showing that. This is what I'm really interested in giving a go myself.
Remember years ago they made these gloves that had gel inside them, which solidified with electric current, trying to give you actually feedback. And I'm really
So obviously it's the developer art.
Yeah.
This allows for very precise and intuitive manipulation of the environment, where you can use your hands much as you would in the real world. I'm using this technology to create a mecha-anime-inspired multiplayer action game where you pilot a house-sized robot in close quarters urban warfare. The precise controls allow you to aim your weapon the same way you would a real gun. Of course, this is a bit harder than it looks. However, you can use both hands to control recoil and aim using large arm movements instead of your wrist. Hitting the target is still not easy, so weapons are going to take well-placed shots.
That's the Razer Hydra, two things, one in each hand, with a green sort of thing. So I'm pretty sure how he's doing it, he's got 15 detecting its location with the fields, and then when he puts his hand close to something, he presses one of the buttons to grab.
Yeah.
Grab all
The
the
same weapon you see pointed at you. Use this to try to trick your opponent while taking pot shots and moving into a better position. Guns certainly dominate open spaces, but city streets would be pretty tight for a large robot. So, proper anime style, they also carry swords. If you can get close, you'll have a big advantage. If you don't put a good amount of rotation into your swing or in a weak joint, your sword will just bounce off your enemy's armor and do no damage. But if you get enough velocity to punch through, then it can be a one-hit kill. And the relatively delicate guns are rendered inoperable by the flick of a wrist. I'm tuning this carefully so that you can't do much by flailing around wildly. Once again, there are no pre-made animations for sword fighting. Move your hands and the robot will try its best to follow you exactly. But since everything is simulated, your arms have limited strength and leverage does matter. As you would expect, blocking toward the grip of your sword is more effective than blocking near the tip. But you have to be careful not to expose your hands as they're easily destroyed. I slowed that practice dummy down so that I would have time to talk, but here's a less forgiving opponent.
That was from the year 2000.
You just get shot from behind.
That feels pretty intense even on my 22-inch monitor. I imagine that it can be done right terrifying, but it fills your field of view. If anyone is watching this on a Rift prototype, I'm very interested to hear your impressions. I made this and a few other experiments to see what is practical with current input technology. And after working with the Hydra, I strongly believe that this mode of interaction is the best next step for virtual reality. rock-solid physics simulation. Currently, it will target high-end PC hardware using DirectX 11. Playing without motion controls or a head-mounted display will be possible, but gameplay will be optimized for their use. More design details will be fleshed out when the Rift is made available in December, and I should have something good to show by then. Thank you for watching, and please post any questions or ideas you may have in the comments.
Yeah, I found it quite interesting in the way you had mapped it with just using the hand location and stuff with the Hydra. As I said, Hydra's quite interesting. I mean, it's got the most potential of the ones that are already out there. Yeah, it does have its limits in that you do have to stay within the bounds of the range of the sphere, which is actually the sensor. So you can't just rotate and wander off this way a bit or something. You still have to face it. You have to be orientated toward it at all times. It has to be sort of start in front of you. But yeah,
How does it actually communicate with it?
it's magnetic fields. Yeah, so they're sensing it. Peripheral sphere is actually doing sensing of where the actual remotes are. Yeah. But yeah, you can still, if you're interested, you can actually, the person announced, you can actually order a Oculus Rift still, the development kit, and it's the same price and everything. So it's $300 and $30 shipping, and they're going to start launching, selling those after they've done the Kickstarter ones that they expect to be January, late January, ship them. That's it. Any questions?
What about using it with the Kinect?
Once again, have you used the Kinect much?
Yeah, yeah.
It's just its resolution and its response rate. I mean, when the Kinect was originally designed, they had a processor in the actual Kinect to do all the sensing and then just feed like the data of the skeleton to the game. But to save costs, they offloaded it all to the CPU, and it just doesn't have the response.
Latency.
Yeah, you've got latency. Of course, your game can't be quite as good because things take like 20% of the processor or something to process all that on its own. So, yeah.
And there's also a problem with the Oculus Rift, which is if they double the resolution, then you've got some games are going to have a problem rendering like 2000s across or something. Because they're rendering twice, so
Yeah.
that's more of a GPU problem. Than
Yeah, it depends on how it's handled in the processor. But yeah, I think I mean, most machines can handle that these days. I'm just wondering how much more of it's load because you're rendering from two perspectives. I mean, how much more of the process taxing is that?
Depends whether the game is GPU bound or not.
Yeah, but as for resolution, it shouldn't be too much of an issue.
I mean, probably it's not going to be that big a problem because you're probably going to be bound by something like texture uploads, and you're not going to have to do double the texture uploads just because
It's becoming very common to have variable resolution rendering these days. Games like Armour, Microsoft Flight, some I've seen recently, but basically it doesn't matter what the resolution is, you can read it under it or you can read it over it. It samples down for anti-aliasing or it samples up with the filtering. It's quite common thing in the Unreal Engine.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so you just get a bit less
Yeah, that you choose.
anti-aliasing or something. And
Yeah, it's a trade-off.
and
You
it's
just
the same.
set the performance.
Yeah.
It's always a slight hit with two views because you're going to have to traverse scenes twice, but it depends on the complexities. It doesn't seem to be a deal.
No, I see. Yeah.
You've seen the Pelican? For a while, it started popping up in a few games. I noticed that some developers were getting seeded with them. We got a box at Oriel, Nev. And it's like a funny looking steering wheel joystick device. And you put your hand on it and it had 6 degrees of motion.
Yeah, is that the one that has force feedback?
Yes, I think it,
And like if you like it'll lock up and if you're gonna hit something or something.
I think it did.
Yeah.
They put it in the Battlefield as well, Battlefield 2 or 3 as a controller.
And it's in Portal? They push it in Portal, I think.
Probably, yeah. A bunch of developers sort of seeded, like, give it a go.
Yeah.
But I think it was expensive and unusual too.
Yeah.
Like it's not something that you just think of like this is the best, the next thing. I really want one.
It was very unusual design. It's like a sphere with like 3 arms coming out of it.
Yeah, that thing. Yeah.
But it did have feedback, so.
So it was novel. It was very precise. I think it was quite accurate.
Yep.
But it's still a huge object to put on your desk and it's very intrusive to actually use.
Yeah.